Hello, can I have 10 minutes of your time? I want to talk about something that I could just talk about until the cows come home. David Bowie. I want to focus on a rather unconventional top six albums. Usually album sort of rankings are top five, but there's one that has kind of been hurtling up my own personal favourites list, and it's this. Lodger. Tony Visconti produced. It's got Brian Eno on this record, Carlos Alomar on this record, and Tony Visconti himself. Lovely gatefold sleeve as well, by the way. Great tracks on here. The obvious ones are things like DJ and Boys Keep Swinging, of course. But for me, the deeper cuts like Move On, Yaz Assassin, African Night Flight are just brilliant. A lot of them quite sort of moody and kind of sort of deep, really. Now, the reason this has snuck into top six is because 18 months ago, I didn't have this vinyl album of Lodger. I had this 24-bit remastered from the late 90s. And I don't know, just didn't work for me. On CD, that's a 6 out of 10 record for me. But on vinyl, the songs lend itself to that format. And I think, in some instances, this does happen. You get certain recordings that sound better on CD or sound better on vinyl. I'm not prejudiced to either format. In fact, there's albums I prefer on CD and there's albums I prefer on vinyl. But this is a classic example of one that sounds 10 times better on record. So that's my number 6. Number 5, bit of a family favourite here in our house, David Bowie, Reality. This is sort of one of his noughties albums with Gail Dorsey on bass and Earl Slick on guitar and, Mike Garson on piano. And it kicks off with Nuclear Star, which is a real fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled rock and roll song. And that really does sort of, it's a sign of intent of how the album's going to go. You've got other sort of real hard rockers like Looking for Water, She'll Drive the Big Car, Days. And you've got some really nice sort of slower numbers as well, like The Loneliest Guy and Bring Me the Disco King, which is almost quite jazzy in essence. Great record. We listened to that in our family a lot in the car. My boy, who's 14, he loves that record. And, whenever we're going in the car, he says, can we listen to Reality, Dad? So, of course, we can. At number 4, Scary Monsters. A brilliant record. Obviously the big 2 hits on here were Ashes to Ashes and Fashion, which sound as good today as they ever did do. But for me, the songs that sort of please me the most, the things like Up the Hill Backwards. It's a great track. Scream Like a Baby, and Because You're Young. They've just got so much of a sort of like a feel about them. Really of their time. Quite new wavy as well. This came out in 1980, and it sort of represents the sort of the musical landscape of the time. Dennis Davis is on drums on here, and the drums are really out front on a lot of these songs, and he does himself really proud on here. It's a great record, and it again produced by Tony Visconti. At number 3, it's brilliant, is this? Diamond Dogs. Great cover art. I love the atmospheric inside of the gatefold there. A bit Turner-esque, isn't it, really, in its feel. This was a band that had Tony Newman and Ainsley Dunbar both on drums, Herbie Flowers on bass. The bass is lovely on this. You got Mike Garson on keyboards, obviously a guy we recognise there on a lot of other Bowie albums. And obviously David Bowie on guitar, saxophone, mellotron, and what have you. This is sort of a homage to the book, George Orwell book 1984, and it's kind of the telling the story of that book, really. And there's just it's really quite a moody listen. It's not a happy listen. Songs like "We Are the Dead," 1984, "Chant of the Ever Circling Skeletal Family." It's quite progressive, dare I say it, as well in the way that it comes across. But you've got some great rockers as well, like obviously "Rebel Rebel," which is pretty out of place on this record, really, because it is just an out-and-out rock song, but a great rock song nonetheless. And "Diamond Dogs" as well, which is just a lovely, lovely tune. So yeah, "Diamond Dogs" number 3. Number 2, I'm going to get people chucking like oranges at the TV or something in a minute when I hold this up, but this is an album that kind of got me into Bowie, really. This came out in 1993. I was born in 77, so I was 16 at the time. His album before this, I was I kind of enjoyed it. Obviously, I'm talking about "Let's Dance," but I was probably just a bit too young to really appreciate it. And this one dropped, and I bought it with my own money. One of the first albums that I bought with my own money, and it's just lovely, And it's Black Tie, White Noise. I remember the song "Jump They Say" getting a lot of airplay. I think it was on MTV at the time, all the time. And it's a great tune, a real feel good sort of high octane tune. You've got the classic "Miracle Goodnight." It's so funky, this album. The sort of the funk and the soul are turned up high. Similarly on "Black Tie, White Noise," and "You've Been Around," the bass is sort of really up there. It's toe-tappingly, pleasingly good. And a little bit of a wild card on this album as well is "Pallas Athena," which is kind of a nod to sort of like the dance culture, really, at the time, and when we all know Bowie was a bit of a chameleon, and sort of this is just a real dance floor filler, really, is "Pallas Athena." It just starts off with this chant, God is on top of it all, and just everything kicks in there after. Lovely, lovely record, and also produced by Nile Rodgers of obviously Chic fame, and that really comes through. It really is a heavily funk soul influenced record. A really fun listen, a real feel good listen. And what I recommend you do is give this one a listen, and then straight after, give "Young Americans" a listen, because they're not too far apart, really. I mean, obviously in years they are, but in terms of the structure of the songs and the feel of the songs and the funkiness of the songs and the soul infused Bowie. I mean, his voice is so rich on this album. For me, it's one of his best albums in terms of his voice. It's just brilliant. And at number 1 for me, well, what can you say? Hunky Dory. Produced by Ken Scott. It's got Woody Woodmansey on drums, who supported him with the Spiders from Mars music as well. Really nice album. All the songs really beautifully written. It's really nice storytelling on this album. All the songs kind of, stuff like, a classic is Kooks, isn't it? A real quirky number. And the lyrical content is just so kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. He sings on Kooks, he sings, and if school gets you down, we'll throw the homework on the fire and we'll take the car downtown, and it's just really lovely and honest. And he'd obviously just had his young kid at that point, and a lot of these songs are kind of written around that as well. You've got the classic Changes, the "Oh You Pretty Things," which is just lovely. Life on Mars, obviously one of his most famous songs. It's kind of up there with Starman as like an evergreen classic for Bowie. Quicksand, one of my personal favourite songs there. Andy Warhol. And that's the thing about this album. There's a lot of sort of, for the time, you know, I mean, this came out in 71. A lot of these songs are quite sort of experimental as well in the production. You know, there's lots of like tapes and sort of stuff in the background, sort of supplementing the guitars and the drums and the bass to kind of enrich the sound. And obviously it finishes with the classic Bewley Brothers. Just every song on that record is class, and for me that is a perfect album. It's a 10 out of 10 album, and if you've not heard it, you know, even if you're not really sure whether you like David Bowie or not, and you know, I appreciate Bowie's not for everybody, but if you give an album, one of his albums, a go, please make it this one, because I think, you know, it'll change your life, without putting a too fine a point on it. Now, I mentioned earlier in reality about my lad who's 14 and that being his favourite record. And I alluded to the fact that the drums on Hunky Dory were from a guy called Woody Woodmansey, who's just a legend, you know, in Bowie circles. And a couple of weeks ago, we went to see a gig in Leeds, and it was a band called Holy Holy. I've mentioned Tony Visconti a few times on this video, and obviously Woody Woodmansey. And Holy Holy is a band centered around those two, and basically it's an authentic Bowie tribute band, if you will. You know, you've got Woody Woodmansey on drums, Tony Visconti on bass, and this quality band. I mean, there was about 10 people on stage. You know, the sound was so full. And big shout out to the singer, a guy called Glenn Gregory, who was a singer, I believe, in Heaven 17, sort of in the 80s, and he did these songs real justice. Now, they had a merch stand there as well, and on the back of the merch stand was a handwritten handwritten by Woody Woodmansey and signed set list for the tour for May and June 2025. And if I just hold this up carefully, what you've got there is you've got Woody Woodmansey's signature and Tony Visconti's signature here. So I had a chat with the guy at the merch stand, and I said, how many of those have you got? And he said 20. And I said, well, I'll have one of those. I'm not letting that go. And you just look, I'll just read this set list through quickly. Width of a Circle, Lady Grinning Soul, Ziggy Stardust, Time, Quicksand, that floated my boat, Changes, Ashes to Ashes, Panic in Detroit, Driving Saturday, Space Oddity, Man Who Sold the World, 5 Years, Starman, Heroes, Rock and Roll Suicide, Life on Mars, Moon Age Daydream. I mean, doesn't get any better than that, does it? Anyway, thanks for sticking with me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Speak soon.